Hey folks, welcome back to Failure Retirement. So today we're here in the garage and I'm working on the Pike a little bit more. Let me get this camera off the tripod and I'll show you what I'm doing. Hang on. So what I've done here, I was struggling with how I was going to mount this auger up here and get it where I wanted it. So I figured I better start with the lower end because it kind of has to be where it needs to be. So I drilled a hole there in the end of the tank, eyeballed the center. Then I took this piece of 1/2 inch pipe and I cut a thin slice because when I did the hinge is going to sit out a little bit because of that bracket I made for the hinge. So I had to have a thin slice down here to space it out evenly. And then I JB welded that in place. Retrospect, I might have been able to spot weld that, but JB weld's fine. That part's never going to show. So I want to make sure I had kind of some extra in there to help hold it there. Not really going to be any pressure on it because what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to put this sheet metal screw through this hole I drilled in the auger to hold it all together. And then once that bottom is located, I can try to figure out what I'm going to do to mount the top. So this is all going to take 2 hands, so let me go ahead and knock that out and I'll get right back to you. Okay, so I finished mounting this auger on the back of the grain box. And what I was explaining before, I think, is I put one sheet metal screw in here in the middle of this, like the discharge box, to locate the bottom where I wanted it. And then I was gonna try to tap a screw into the back of this pipe, but like, where does a guy drill the hole? I can't drill it from the inside. There isn't enough room. So I ended up welding on this little tab right here. And I wasn't in love with that idea, but I also wasn't in love with the idea of one sheet metal screw and one little bitty number 6 screw holding that whole thing on there on this thin sheet metal. So I welded this tab and I did get a hole drilled in the back and get it lined up. And then I put another tab over here on the side because, again, like, this auger's kind of heavy and this sheet metal is thin, thin, thin. So I went ahead and put this tab here on the side, got a third, well, really 1 screw and 3 bolts now at this point. But I think it came out pretty decent. The auger does unfold. I made this little saddle for the auger to sit in, and I just went ahead and spot welded that right onto the sheet metal, no problem. So that, I think, is working the way I wanted it to work. I still got just a little bit more work to do on it. I'm going to fill this gap right here. Sorry about that. Fill that gap in there where that hinge is. I'm going to fill that with JB weld, I think. So the other thing I realized later on is I showed you the interior after I finished it inside the cab, but I never really showed it to you outside the cab. So this is what it looks like. It still maybe needs just a, oh boy, I lost my voice. Still needs just maybe just a little bit more work, but not much. I made a smaller bushing to go on that steering shaft there. I had a much bigger one in there before, just something I had. So I actually made a correct size one and put in there. But I think that's pretty good. I think it'll need to be painted and seat upholstered. I need to make myself a decal probably with the gauges on the dash. I think that's the direction I'm headed. So the next thing that I've already started here, since the grain tank is almost finished, I figured we need a fuel tank. So I kind of took a cue from the Smith Miller, and since we're only probably going to have one tank, I just made it just a wee bit longer, and it is just a wee bit bigger around. It's going to go on the other side, but it'll sit back in here something like this. That's the master plan. And then, so I've started making the ends. So the way I do this, and there's probably better ways. The way I do this is I just put the sheet metal over the end of the pipe, take the ball peen and just start tapping on that and working it to the shape you want. And this is just like a lot of little taps is better, right? You don't want to just slam it one big time. At least I don't. I guess maybe you could. I just give it a lot of little taps. And the more the better, kind of. Otherwise, it looks like a sack of walnuts, kind of. And this is still a little rough. But what I'll do here next is trim this round, cut it back around where it needs to be. And then ultimately, I'll probably JB weld that onto that tank. And I'll maybe use just a wee bit of filler. Once I get it on the tank, I'll probably just sand the metal a little bit, take some of the high spots out, and then I'll probably put a little filler on it. But I got both ends there made up. And next step is, well, beyond trimming the sheet metal and finishing the ends, figuring out how I'm going to mount it to the chassis. All right, those are the next steps on the Pike. All right, folks, it's been a couple weeks since I filmed any progress here, but progress has been made. Just been a lot of things going on, so it's just little bitty projects at a time right now. So as you can see, I've been working on the interior, got a coat of paint on it, put twin sticks in there because, well, that's just cool. This is just a paper, just scaling it out, but this is what I'm going to make into a decal for the dash. And then the cab along those lines, I decided, and I might be wrong here, but I painted this red. I don't know if this was a diesel truck thing too, but it was certainly a pickup thing when I was growing up. I know my dad had at least one pickup that was white with a red interior. So I decided, what the heck. The last couple Smith Miller Max I did, I was kind of disappointed. It was the way Smith Miller did it, but when I sprayed the cab, overspray got it on the interior. Smith Miller did the same thing, but I just thought it really kind of left an unfinished look. So that's why the interior and the different color on the interior on the cab. So moving on, I have glass beaded the wheels, got them pretty much ready for paint. The hubcaps here, I don't know, I'm still riding the fence. These are the original Dopke hubcaps that came off the road grader where I got the wheels. And it's tempting to polish them back the way Dopke would have had them. I'm quite confident I can get them shiny enough for me. However, you know, the Pike had, at least originally, had military planetary axles. And the planetaries were always color matched to the rest of the machine. And so I'm really leaning towards just painting them. The yellow, I'm going to paint the machine because that's going to make the machine look more correct, I think. So let me know, drop a comment if you disagree. I doubt if I'll get a comment on that, but it would be cool. It would be Dopke-like if it was polished, but I think just more accurate if it's not. So I got a coat of primer on the grain box here. So next comes a little bit of filler here and there on some of the bigger spot weld holes, and then some more sanding and some painting. But we're making progress on this. We're about ready. The chassis is just about ready for paint. Needs a little bit of cleanup, but the biggest thing is I have to get the interior in the cab, get the cab back on and screwed down, and try to link the steering wheel up to the steering on the front axle. None of those parts are on there right now, but I need to get that linked up. That's really the last fabrication I think that I have, and then the whole thing will be going in for paint. So one last thing that I've been working on for a little bit. I originally wasn't going to do this, but I was thinking about it and I decided it really needed an auger. Originally I thought it's just gonna sit on the shelf, nobody's gonna see inside, auger not really required. But the more I thought about it, the more it's just gonna be cool with an auger. I actually tried one afternoon to make my own flights by hand, and well, that dog just didn't hunt. So I took a step back, talked to my buddy John, who's built some augers in real life, and between him and I, we kind of came up with this idea of using a spring. It was already, this is actually a little bit smaller piece of tube than I started out with, but I found this tube and this spring that are more or less the same size, and I decided that that kind of pretty much was as close as I was going to get to the look that I wanted. So one more thing that I almost forgot. I finished the fuel tank. Pretty happy with the way that turned out. So I just cut some narrow strips of sheet metal and spot welded them on there. And then I hit them with the polishing wheel a little bit. I tack welded this plate on the back, drilled it and threaded it to bolt onto the frame. I don't know, there's some nicks in this little pipe, so I was gonna fill those nicks and paint it, but I kind of like the looks of it so much how it is that I might just clear it. So anyway, pretty happy with that. I mentioned the ends and hammering them out. I don't know if you can really see it on the camera. They're not perfectly smooth, but they are pretty close. After I got them on the tank, I hit it with the belt sander a little bit and got them, pretty smooth in all metal with no filler. So even if I clear it, I'm going to be okay with that if they're not perfectly smooth, because, well, a tank on an old farm rig like this, honestly, hardly ever straight to start with. You can see there's the two holes in the frame where it bolts on. So give me a minute and I'll just bolt it on there for you so you can see how it looks, and then we'll call it a day. Hang on. Okay, so that's what she looks like on the rig. Pretty satisfied with that myself. Let me know what you think, but I think for what it is, it came out just about perfect. All right, so we're gonna call it a day here. I appreciate everybody watching. I appreciate the comments. You all have a nice day, and we'll see you next time on Failure at Retirement. Thanks for watching.